My name is Lila. I was the girl they whispered about. She doesn't even have real parents. She's just some orphan. Don't touch her stuff, it might be from a shelter. Those words followed me everywhere growing up. School hallways, birthday parties, even church. People didn't say it to my face, not always. But I heard it. I felt it. In the way they looked at me. The way their moms pulled them back slightly when I walked near. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone. And everyone knew I came from St. Margaret's Home for Girls. An orphanage tucked behind a church, 3 blocks from the bakery. The kids called it the leftovers place. Adults were a little more polite, but their eyes said enough. I was dropped off at St. Margaret's when I was 3. No note. No name. Just me in a red coat that didn't fit and a stuffed lion with one eye missing. The nuns gave me the name Lila. Sister Agnes used to say, "You bloomed in a place where nothing was supposed to grow." He meant it as love. But it always sounded like pity. The first time I realized I was different was in 1st grade. We were doing family trees. I didn't have one. When I told the teacher, she smiled awkwardly and said, "You can make one up." The class laughed. I remember coloring branches that led to no one, then throwing the paper away during recess. Jake Mullen was the worst. Blonde. Loud. The type of kid who peaked at 12. He'd shout, "Orphan alert," when I walked into the cafeteria. Once he put a sign on my locker that said, "Free to a good home." I didn't cry. I never did. Instead I listened. Watched. Memorized everything they said, everything they did. Like I was collecting receipts. Because deep down, even at 8, I knew I wouldn't always be just Lila from St. Margaret's. I just didn't know how yet. At 13, I got my first part-time job cleaning the local library on weekends. I used the money to buy notebooks and sketchbooks. I'd sit in the back stacks and draw for hours. Houses, cities, entire worlds where people like me weren't less than. Where we weren't laughed at. Where we were architects of our own lives. Sometimes I'd sketch until my hands cramped. I didn't care. Creating was the only time I felt in control. The only time I felt like I mattered. I dreamed of designing billboards one day. Not just clothes or art, but messages so bold no one could ignore them. At 15, a couple came to adopt me. The Jacksons. Rich. Smiling. Perfect teeth. They said they wanted to give back. I said no. Sister Agnes was horrified. "Lila, this could be your chance." I looked her in the eye and said, "I'm not a charity case. I'm building something." She didn't understand. No one did. The other girls called me crazy. "You turned down a pool and your own bathroom," one of them whispered. I didn't care. They were waiting for someone to save them. I was learning to save myself. At 17, I applied to college without telling anyone. Every scholarship. Every program. I wrote essay after essay, pouring my story onto every page. I didn't get into the fancy schools, but I got into a solid state university with a full ride. Graphic design. I packed my bags alone. Said goodbye to the orphanage without a single tear. I promised myself I would never let them forget me. But they wouldn't remember me as that orphan girl. They'd remember what I built. College wasn't easy. I didn't know anyone. I didn't even know how to open a checking account. But I knew how to adapt. Orphans are like that. We learn to read rooms before we learn to trust people. We survive by observing. The first thing I noticed in college was that I didn't speak the same language. Not literally, just socially. People talked about family weekends, dad's credit card, visiting home. I smiled and nodded, pretending I knew what any of that felt like. But I didn't. I had no home to visit. My dorm room was the first space I'd ever had all to myself. I made it mine, filled it with sketches, quotes on the wall, and a single photo of St. Margaret's front steps. My classmates were talented. Some had connections in the design industry already. I had determination and a second-hand laptop. So I worked harder, stayed up later, turned every assignment into a challenge. While others submitted clean, simple logos, I turned mine into layered narratives. One professor pulled me aside. "Lila," she said, "you design like you've got something to prove." I smiled. "That's because I do." In my second year, I landed an unpaid internship at a mid-tier design agency downtown. I commuted 2 hours by bus each way, filed papers, got coffee, and soaked in every single meeting like it was gold. One day I saw a mock-up for a charity campaign on the table. Something about child hunger. The design was bland. I stayed after hours, redesigned it without being asked, and left it on the creative director's desk. The next morning he called me in. "Did you do this?" I nodded, ready for him to say I'd crossed a line. Instead he said, "We're going with yours." That campaign made it to billboards across the city. And for the first time ever, my name was in the credits. I printed that billboard and taped it above my desk. That summer I got a paid freelance gig from a nonprofit. Then another. By the time I graduated, I had a small portfolio and a big dream to start my own design firm. But I needed money and credibility. So I took a job at a high-pressure agency known for chewing people up and spitting them out. I worked 60-hour weeks. Rarely slept. Cried in bathroom stalls. But I learned. By 25, I was promoted to art director. By 27, I left to build my own agency. I called it Found. As in, not lost. Not given away. Not left behind. At first, it was just me in a studio apartment with a folding table and a dream. Then came a client. Then another. Word spread. She's intense, but she listens. I built my business on the idea that stories matter, especially the ones people don't want to hear. Adopted kids. Survivors. Outsiders. I made room for them all. By 30, Found had 12 employees, national campaigns, and a reputation for turning pain into power. That's when the email came. Subject: Opportunity at St. Margaret's. It was from Sister Agnes. They were in trouble. Donations down. Roof leaks. They were going to shut down unless someone stepped in. I stared at the screen. For 5 minutes. Then 10. Then an hour. That building, the one they called the Leftovers place, had become a burden to the town. But to me, it was the beginning. I didn't respond right away. I visited instead. Walked those halls again. Saw the paint peeling, the cracked tiles, the tiny shoes lined up by the door. I saw a girl sketching in the corner, just like I used to. She looked up and smiled. I saw myself. I asked Sister Agnes what she needed. She looked tired. "We need someone who believes we still matter." I didn't tell her I already knew the answer. I just said, "Give me a week." When I left, I didn't cry. I called my accountant. Then my board. And then I started writing the proposal that would change everything. I had seen the way Ben looked at people when he thought they were useful, and the way he dropped them when they no longer were. And on our wedding day, I realized I had just become one of those people. But that wasn't the part that hurt the most. What stung deeper was realizing how many signs I had ignored. The jokes he made about my dreams, the way he introduced me as just a freelance artist, the little eye rolls when I got passionate about a project. I mistook them for quirks. Red flags masquerading as personality. So when Ben ran, I didn't run after him. I went back inside the venue, lifted the hem of my dress, and walked straight to the open bar. Liam was still there. Alone. He had seen it all. The whispers, the silence that followed when the crowd parted, the stunned expressions of my family. But when I sat next to him, he didn't ask if I was okay. He just ordered 2 whiskeys and said, "To your freedom." We drank. And for the first time that day I laughed. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was something: respect. A sense of being seen, not sized up. The next few days were chaos. Guests asking questions. My parents devastated about the embarrassment. My sister, smug as ever, saying I should have seen it coming. But I stayed silent. I needed clarity, not noise. I stayed with my friend Mia for a while. We watched terrible rom-coms and ate ice cream straight out of the container. I didn't cry. I journaled instead. I sketched. I slept like I hadn't in months. Then one afternoon Liam texted. "Lunch?" I said yes. We met at a quiet cafe on the edge of the park. He didn't mention the wedding. He just asked what I was working on. I told him I was illustrating a children's book. He asked to see my sketches. I showed him. He said they were brilliant, not in a fake way but in a quiet, thoughtful tone that made me believe it. That lunch turned into weekly walks. Then daily texts. Then real conversations. He told me about his startup, how he'd built it from scratch, how he wasn't sure if it would last but was proud of what it stood for. He talked about failure with honesty, about family with restraint. 3 months later, I was invited to speak at a local art event. I hesitated. Public speaking wasn't my thing. But Liam looked me in the eyes and said, "You have something to say. Say it." So I did. I spoke about resilience. About reimagining identity when the one you built collapses. The audience applauded. A small girl came up after and asked me to sign her sketchbook. I saved that moment in my mind like a photograph. That night, Liam walked me home. We didn't talk much. But right before he left, he said, "You've changed." Have I? You've always been this. You just stopped hiding it. That was the night I knew. Not that I loved him, though maybe I did. But that I would never again shrink to fit someone else's comfort. It's around this point in my story that most people expect a dramatic twist. A public revenge. A confrontation with Ben. But that's not what happened. What happened was quieter. Stronger. Revenge doesn't always look like fury. Sometimes it looks like peace. Like waking up and knowing you're free. Like sitting across from someone who listens when you speak. Like drawing what you want without apology. If you're watching this and you've ever been underestimated, left behind, or made to feel like your worth depends on someone else, you're not alone. Comment below. Where are you watching from? And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Tempest for more stories like this. Your next chapter starts with one decision. Make it yours. Liam never asked me to define us. Maybe that's what I liked most in the beginning. There was no pressure to rush, label, or perform. I had just crawled out of a collapsed identity. The last thing I needed was another role to play. We spent time building something slower. Realer. While I dove into new art projects, Liam invited me to tour his office. It wasn't what I expected. No marble floors or glass conference rooms. Just exposed brick, warm lighting, and quiet people who genuinely seemed to care about the work. He introduced me to his team as the reason I remember why I started this place. It was the first time in years I felt proud standing beside someone. But of course, nothing stays untouched forever. The whispers started with a LinkedIn notification. Ben Winters has updated his job status. He had taken a new position. Vice President of Strategic Development. At Liam's company. The very company whose mission was about authenticity, collaboration, and creative growth. He was now in charge of partnership strategy. I stared at the screen. My stomach sank. When I told Liam, he blinked twice and said, "I had no idea he even applied. HR handles that level now." He paused. "Do you want me to remove him?" I shook my head. "No. Let him walk in." Liam studied my face. "Are you sure?" "I'm not the one who needs to be afraid." The following week, the office hosted a leadership luncheon. Liam asked if I'd join as a guest. I agreed. Not out of pettiness, at least not entirely. But because I had decided something. I would not let ghosts dictate the rooms I walked into. When Ben entered, I felt the temperature drop slightly. He saw me. And for a split second, I saw panic flash in his eyes. I smiled. A calm, steady smile. He approached cautiously. "Ava, I didn't expect to see you here." "Why not?" I said, lifting my coffee. "I tend to show up where I belong." There was a long pause. He cleared his throat. "I know what happened was. I'm not here for that, Ben. Ich tut dir. But since you brought it up, thanks." He blinked. "What?" "Thanks for running. You didn't break me. You freed me." His face flushed. His voice dropped. "You don't understand what I was going through." "You're right," I said, leaning in slightly. "I don't. And I don't need to." Then I turned and walked back to my seat. Liam watched the whole thing from across the room. When I sat beside him, he whispered, "You okay?" I nodded. "I am now." The luncheon moved on. Ben faded into the background. And I didn't. That afternoon, Liam and I walked through the city. We didn't talk much. But when we passed a mural on the side of an old bookstore, a phoenix rising from the ashes, I stopped. He looked at it too. "That feels like you," he said. I smiled. "That's the goal." By the end of that month, I was invited to speak on a creative resilience panel. Me on a stage again. I told my story not as a victim, not even as a cautionary tale, but as a woman who decided that being left behind was just another way of being set free. That panel changed things. After the event, I was approached by a small publishing house looking for new voices in women-led memoirs. The editor said my story had clarity, resilience, and most importantly, hope. I told her I wasn't sure if I was ready to write a book. She said, "You've already started. The question is whether you'll finish it." For the first time, I let myself consider the idea. Meanwhile, Liam and I continued building a quiet life. We still took the subway. Still ordered too much Thai food. Still stayed up too late watching documentaries we never finished. But something shifted in how I saw myself. I wasn't looking in mirrors to make sure I was good enough. I wasn't seeking approval. I was just being. And that was everything. The real surprise came 6 months later. Liam proposed. Not with fireworks or flash mobs, just a handwritten note folded into my sketchbook. It said, "If you say yes, this isn't a second chance. It's the first time anyone's gotten it right." I laughed. I cried. And then I said yes. We got married in a botanical garden with 30 guests. No limos. No grand entrances. No centerpieces taller than our conversations. Just us. Present. Whole. Chosen. A few people from his company came, including Ben. He stayed in the back row. Said nothing. Just watched. And I let him. Because some lessons don't need to be spoken. They just need to be lived. 2 years later, I published that memoir. It wasn't just about heartbreak. It was about reclamation. It was about what happens when a woman reclaims the pen and rewrites the story others tried to script for her. It hit bestseller list. But what mattered most were the messages. From women who'd been left behind, laughed at, discarded. They said, "You made me feel seen. You helped me leave. You reminded me I can still build something." That's when I knew the real twist. It wasn't the wedding. It wasn't even the revenge. It was the freedom to live without needing it. I'm not Ava, the woman who got left. I'm Ava, the woman who walked forward anyway. If you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, or told your worth depended on someone else's choice, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Subscribe to Revenge Tempest for more stories where survival becomes strength. And remember, you're never too late to begin again.